Hi folks, you're all very welcome to Hot Country. I'm Cheide and I hope you can stay tuned now and enjoy the chat and indeed the music. Well, not many people can boast that they've been performing for over 6 decades, but our next guest can. He's the man with the golden trumpet, Johnny Carroll. Johnny, you're very welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jo.
It's great to have you here.
That's great. It's great to meet you eventually, even though you're my neighbour.
Yes, we don't live
I've
too
seen
far
you
apart.
many times on television, but never the pleasure of your company before, so thank you for having me on the show.
Well, it's lovely to have you. How can you be 6 decades performing when you don't look 60 years old,
My
Johnny?
God. Well, would you believe it? I started at a very young age. I started at the age of 13. And do you want me to tell you how I started?
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, originally I come from a town in Roscommon called Castlereagh. My family are from there, my mother and father were from there. And Castlereagh was a very small little rural town many, many years ago. But they started a brass band there, going back 50, 60 years ago. And my dad encouraged me to join the brass band, which was very, very difficult at the time, Joe, because at that particular time, there was no television in Ireland, really. All you had was the cinema, and I was too young to go to the pictures at night. But my point is that when they started the brass band, most of the big guys in the town wanted to join the band. So the first night I went down was maybe about 70 or 80 guys looking for instruments to play, and there was only about 25 or 30 instruments in the band room. So of course I was sent home every night. I'd go down my little bicycle, my father flash lamp, drive in, cycle in 2 or 3 miles into the band room, and every night when the practice would start, the band would say, "Well, now young Carroll, it's time for you to go." So I was back home again, and my dad said to me, "How did you get on tonight?" I said, "Dad, look, there's too many big fellas there." But he says, "Go back again next week," and he encouraged me to go back each week. And eventually, Joe, what happened is this, that like everything else, the bigger guys started dropping off and, didn't come the following week. So eventually one night the bandmaster says, "Look at this, there's young Carroll, just give him an instrument." So he handed me a cornet. And a cornet is a smaller version of the trumpet for the brass bands. So that's how I started. And I started on the cornet, and my band leader, the master at the time, the bandmaster, I started teaching his music, so I learned how to read a little bit of music. And eventually my dad says to me, he says, I had a little cornet, small little miniature trumpet, and he says, "I'd love you to have a trumpet." But to be quite honest, Joe, my parents couldn't afford a trumpet at the time because, ordinary people. And my parents ordered a trumpet from Walton's in Dublin. I think it cost about, at that time now, to be about 27 or 28 pounds, which is a lot of money. I always remember it came on the higher purchase, we're paying so much a week for it. And I always remember the when I got the trumpet, it came on a Christmas Eve in 1956, I'd say, into Castlereagh, because it was the telegram. We got the telegram by, comes this parcel in the station this evening. So my dad went in Christmas Eve, and we brought it home on the back of the bicycle, my first trumpet. And I started practicing, and I really loved it from day one. And kept practicing, and eventually we used to go, that time with the brass band, we'd go out on Christmas Eve to play under the lamppost, and we'd go out Easter time. So we started going out at night, and on particular days, Patrick's Day. Now, it was only 12 years at the time when I started going out around the streets at night, when the band would go with the bigger guys. I was still in short pants. And how I got the break in the business is this: just imagine what's laid out for you in life. There was a garage directly across the road from my house, and the boss of the garage, he'd work pretty late himself at night, and he'd maybe work till 10 or 11, maybe midnight some nights, but he'd always leave the keys of the garage into my house across the road. So when the staff would come in the morning, whoever the manager was, he'd come across to my house, "Joe Carroll," we'd give him the keys, he'd open the garage. So this particular night anyway, there was a young band at the particular time, there's a young band after starting in Ballinturbo, which is beside Castlereagh. They're a young little band. Of course, I knew not about show bands. The one thing I've never out of the town in my life was just went to the cinema. But this band has started, and they were playing a gig up in Roscommon, a place called Dysart, and they had an old bet-up van. I always remember that, and it broke down. So the van was towed into the garage across the road from my house on a Saturday morning, I think it was. And the boss of the garage says, "Well, when you want the van on Sunday night, because they're doing a gig Sunday night in Castlereagh," he says, "go across to Joe Carroll's house, the keys are there, he'll let you in, and you collect the van." So Dad says, this said fine. So as it happened, just out of the blue, I'll always remember, we're listening to the radio, no television that time in the house, so the Dad says to me, he says, take out that trumpet there, he says, and give me a tune. And I was terrified by it. He goes, it was a hard, you know, if you pipped a note or something. But what he didn't realise is that with the trumpet, you develop a lip and you develop a muscle. So at that time, when you wouldn't be playing or working as much at it, your muscle got soft. So the more I played, the lip got softer, I wasn't able to hit the notes, and he gave out hell to me. So I was playing away a march at the table. We had no electricity. There was an eye lamp in the house, so a little bit of music up in front of me, playing whatever it was, Colonel Bogey or some march. And about 7:30 on a winter's night, the knock came to the front door, and it was the guys from the band. And my dad says, okay, brought them across to the garage, gave them the van, and the boys went off. And 3 weeks later, Joe, another knock came to the door on a Saturday evening. And it was the band leader, a fellow called Paddy Malone. Now, he was only a teenager at the time also. I was very young, I was only 13, short pants, but Paddy would have been 18 or 19, which to me was a grown man, you know?
Yes.
So he says, the last night we knocked on the door, so we heard some young fella somebody playing a trumpet here. And my dad says, yeah, that was my young fella. And he says, would you allow him join the band? No. Joe, at that time, it was a no-go situation. He says, not in a million years. That time, it was unknown for anybody to be that young on the road. So, he says, no way. So that was it. So he went away. And he said, well, I'll tell you what he said to my dad. He says, I'll come back in a couple of weeks' time just to see if you change your mind. So my mum said to him when I came into the kitchen, wow, he said, some fellow wants our young not to join a band. No way, he's not going on the road. He's going to have a good pensionable job, working wherever it may be, in a shop or post office in town, whatever it is. So I was sort of heartbroken. So I persuaded my mom to talk to Dad to see would he give me a chance with him, and he wouldn't hear of it. So when Paddy Malone came back 3 weeks later, he came into the kitchen again, and I suppose my mom had spoken to Dad. So look, I want to give him a night or two just to try it. But I think what swung out for me at the time, Joe, is that the premier races, originally they were called the pioneer races. You all wore their badges, the whole lot, had to change the name. They were all teetotalers, none of them drank, none of them took alcohol, which was fantastic. So when Dad heard that, he says to Paddy, he says, okay, he said, take him for 2 or 3 weeks during the summer, when he's going back to school, you know, when the school opened again in September. So I always remember I went off with my little short pants and my trumpet in a case, and off to Ballinrobe and Corpus Christi, 1957. Never out of the county in my life before, but all these grown-up men, as I thought, but lovely, lovely guys. And we played in a place called the Maple Ballroom in Ballinrobe. And 62 years later, I'm still playing. But that's how it all started for me.
Wow.
But it just goes to show you, Joe, what's laid out for you in life. You never know. You can take a left corner or a right corner. But if I hadn't been playing the trumpet that night, at that particular time, when these guys came to the door on a winter's night, I'd be still in Castlereagh. God knows what I'd be doing. But I know one thing, I would never have joined a band as good to me. I would have done as much as the premier races.
Yes.
Because you may ask, why did they allow me continue with the band? They allowed me continue with the band because we started to become very popular after a short little time. But I was still going to school, and sometimes if we're doing a long journey, when I call a long journey at that time, it might be 30 or 40 mile radius, but I would take my bit of homework with me. But I still went to school the following day. But eventually I couldn't do it anymore. I just had to quit school because there were more gigs coming in. Now, they weren't very long gigs, but they were enough for a young fellow of 13 not to be on the road. So I persuaded my parents to sort of let me stay at it, and I promised I would get out of it the following year. But as it happened, we became very, very popular, and at that time money was scarce. I have to tell you, money was very, very scarce, Joe, and whatever few pound I was bringing in, my parents got half it, and maybe more, so it was a big help to them at the time. And the boys